Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. This is, of course, a strange music show where, we look at a different albums each and every week and whatnot, So in today's episode, we are, of course, having another very Pink episode, as we are returning to the sonic soundscapes of Pinkcourtesyphone, the incredibly mysterious and enigmatic ambient sound art project led by the one and only Richard Chartier. And so in today's episode, we are looking at what I would describe as a very peculiar little release, hidden in amongst the ever-growing discography of mysterious Pink vignettes. This release feels to me, like a little mystery, hidden within the very mystery, but of course it's one that I just adore with its incredibly subtle lowercase notions, very hypnotic dreamy vibes, but also a very ominous mystery happening under the surface of all. Very peculiar. There's a darkness to this one, but also it's still swathed in all the pink that you get with the project. So yeah, without further ado, I present Something You Are, or Something You Do, by Pinkcourtesyphone. So yeah, a return to the lush sonic world of Pinkcourtesyphone. If you want to know a little bit more about Pinkcourtesyphone and or Richard Chartier, then by all means feel free to check out the videos on Decisive Forms by Richard Chartier or Ravishment of Mirror by Pinkcourtesyphone. So yeah, since that video on a Ravishment of Mirror though, I have been meaning to dive into Pinkcourtesyphone more and more, but it's very difficult music to write about because it's always music that just pulls me into this very hypnotic sleep, essentially. Yeah, in today's episode, we are of course diving into Something You Are, or Something You Do, a 29-minute excursion into the dreamy narcotics soundscapes that was originally released back in 2017 on cassette by the Tapeworm as its 95th official release. And comprised of just 2 tracks, we are essentially, just given Pinkcourtesyphone just doing what he does best, essentially, just creating these, in this case, rather long patches of music that just pulls you into this hypnotic slumber as you dive into the very depths of your duvet and pillows itself, pulled through Lynchian nightmares that completely knock you out with its vivid and horror imagery. Like all Pinkcourtesyphone releases, it is one that feels shrouded in this mystery, with it bearing all the hallmarks of Richard Chartier's secrets when it comes to the projects, with its liner notes telling us very little. Formed in Plastics and Particulars by Richard Chartier 2015. I am lonely, yet I feel wonderful. This cassette is a hot pink product of the Tapeworm. Scrambled eggs don't have definitive borders. So, of course, once again, a little bit obtuse, but it's always what I adore about this project. This sense of not being told any direct answers, and instead forcing you as a listener of the media to just discover the secrets within. With, these very notes, these liner notes, only acting as gentle pushes in, not even the right direction, but a certain direction maybe. Very peculiar, but it seems to just come up with every single release under the moniker, and this of course is just no different, is it? So without further ado, let's dive into the music and discover what's happening here. So opening up on side A with But in Felt / In Other Dreams, we're given a dark smouldering atmosphere of incredibly airy drones just emanating outwards like a slow breath of air, slowly circling down the spiral of consciousness itself as objects rattle and echo in the empty rooms, expanding their sounds in these incredibly slow rises of volume as it attempts to take over entirely, before a faint rhythm of sorts is established by what sounds like the faintest footsteps from far away getting ever closer. It then becoming accompanied by the swells of ominous drones that rise out from within the incredibly dark and murky miasma. And there's something so very sinister happening here, as though our character has slipped a Valium or something or other, and is slowly slipping out of consciousness with only barest of details coming through in amongst the darkening confusion. But it's the sound design here that's just truly brilliant though, with these sounds feeling sourced from the most peculiar of locations, sounding like empty corridors and abandoned buildings perhaps. And the more it all develops, the more sinister it all starts to feel though, as drones just loop in and out of that silence though, creating these very peculiar moments of tension that just seem to grab a hold of your heart as you slip further and further out of consciousness itself. It's of course that typical dreamlike quality to it, and weirdly enough, with the way the loops just enter the scene before fading out and beginning again, there is this incredibly narcotic and relaxing element to how it all sounds, just perfectly pulling you further down into the darkness as your eyes get heavier and heavier, forcing you to close them and succumb to the darkness that's behind your very eyes. It's so cool and so oddly David Lynchian, I find, of just these very dark, mysterious dreams. But I just love how it all sounds and how it all just expresses itself, And as well with this one, I just love those little, brief instances of sounds intermittently coming through the headphones, the rattling of objects, the scratching of something, or the granular quality that seems to, scratch the itches in your very ears themselves, as they just float past with that drifting quality. It's of course that perfect sort of symbiosis that Chartier always finds with his Pinkcourtesyphone project of creating this very unsettling and sinister soundscape that does relax somehow. Especially when you get pulled into these, these moments of, especially when you get pulled into these moments of electronic interference that seem to threaten to pull apart the very composition itself as it throws it all across the floor almost, although it never does. It seems to approach the threshold, but instead it just continues that slow crawl descent into the murky depths below. But I just so adore how, just how fascinating it is, and all the little playful elements that are in it as well, With how dark and sinister it is, it fascinates me how delightfully playful the particulars of the music are at times. The way little sound instances, for example, just drift in from seemingly nowhere, occupying the scene for just a few moments, spinning around in a formless twirl before disappearing into the darkness once again. And all the while, these continuing drones, they just push forward and forward, creating the groundwork for these minute details to appear within. And it's like any loop that does occupy the scene, it lasts just enough time to lull you in, before subtly shifting and morphing into new elements that change up the vibe entirely. It's all so incredibly subtle, so typically minimalist, but wonderful in how it perfectly navigates through these various movements. And I find midway into this one, the vibe, as sinister as it sounded, it starts to become a bit less sinister, and it's here probably that the narcotics have pulled our 1950s housewife into that dreary slumber, completely unaware of the outside world as the mind just formulates visions behind closed eyes, almost like a personal romantic seduction from the darkest of sources. A truly fascinating little composition that pulls you right into the very experience this album is trying to offer us. Of course, flipping the cassette over brings us to the second track, She Who Controls. And so a further pushing of the dark miasmas here, sinister atmospheres and the seductive drones, that romanticize such peculiar notions of darkness once again. And this one, I think, just starts off so wonderfully, just so wonderfully minimal with, these airy drones and this incredibly gentle tapping that's barely there, almost just barely forming in amongst that mix, getting lost within the climbing winds that become a little bit more ferocious the more it all develops. And this one, to me, it kind of feels very cold and chilling to hear, really taking its time to develop as it just further pushes these peculiar little lowercase instances. It's like, after slipping into the dream world from the first track, we've now found ourselves at this very peculiar and empty landscape. The dust being kicked up by the growing winds as you attempt to find any detail of anything within that vast openness. Like being caught literally in the middle of nowhere, perhaps, with the echoing sounds signalling some form waiting to be found within the nothingness, perhaps, only impossible to really hone in on and visualise. And it feels to me a little bit darker than its preceded track in some respects, but with extra consideration to how airy and windy so many of the drones sound on this one. I find, oddly enough though, especially with that sort of windy element to it, it's a little bit more relaxing in some respects, you know? It's perhaps that gentle build of noise that it's that kind, you know, this kind of ambient sound design offers, perhaps, sounding like the very forces of nature themselves as you get pulled into those sleepy slumbers. Chilling, of course, but it's what makes it so incredibly interesting to me, as it all slowly occurs moment by moment, conjuring up this continued imagery of empty fields being lost in a foggy landscape, and being unable to discern any details here. And so I think, you know, the vast majority of Pink Courtesy albums, though, as mentioned, they all follow that same aesthetic, you know, of romanticism, the colour pink, housewives, and of course a sinister dark underbelly underneath everything happening. We did explore this a lot on our dive into A Ravishment of Mirror, and it's something you do see a lot of on any album under the moniker, though. But that being said, I think this one feels a lot colder and emptier than anything we've heard on the moniker before, you know, with perhaps some consideration to be thrown to the last two albums by Pinkcourtesyphone, which felt very dark and very sinister, I have to say. But this one just feels so dark, so empty and so despairing, like there's little to no moments of warmth to be heard here, with it all just staying out in the cold and the suffering perhaps. It makes to me one of the more darker and unsettling albums under the Pinkcourtesyphone moniker, and it fascinates me how it only just presents the dark and sinister for the most part, you know, as though there's no joy or comfort to be found anywhere. Like a short film that only tells you the macabre parts and nothing else. It's interesting, because it's very ominous, very scary almost, but it's still very relaxing to me. But the atmospheres and vibes are bizarrely uncomfortable, especially when you sit down and really listen to the particulars of it all. Just these hollow and empty drones that are, you know, blowing like the forces of nature, and they never seem to offer any comfort at any point. And it's interesting how it all started off rather dark to begin with on the first track, only to sort of guide itself into sort of more somber romantic moments, only to then get pulled into even darker moments on the second track perhaps. Truly fascinating album, I find, that's, you know, I think a little bit more under the radar than most of the releases by Pinkcourtesyphone. I think a lot more abstract sound design that stretches the audio of these, you know, airy drones, these lowercase notions, these very long passages of drones that do feel formless and empty. But it results in this incredibly fascinating listening experience. Very weird, but truly fascinating to me, I have to say. It's of course quickly mentioning, you know, just briefly before we finish, the very end of this album though, which does feature some classic Pinkcourtesyphone aesthetics in the form of a brief audio sample. So in the mix, it feels incredibly indiscernible, but it echoes out with this wonderful presence that just brings the entire composition and this final album to a close. So this is something you do see a fair bit of from Chartier, but it's always a delight when it comes up, as it gives these compositions, you know, some sense of real character, I find, you know, a kind of cementing of themes and concepts in the form of something arguably more tangible in amongst that miasma. And these snippets of audio of voices speaking with these echoing reverbs and effects, you know, they feel like the small snippets of the actual image being presented by the music, I would argue. And they occur so often throughout the course of most of the various albums under this moniker, and every time it does, I feel like we're just being shown short excerpts of film noir scenes, of old movies playing scenes on loop as it echoes out of reality itself. And some of these moments and instances are some of my favourite parts of the various compositions, I have to say, and others incredibly peculiar moments. But I love the one here though, as it takes, you know, 28 minutes or so just to build up to this entire point to arrive here, and it becomes the tiniest little microcosm of the scene situated right at the very end of it all. You know, like briefly being pulled back into reality as you become aware of the surroundings that vanished under that blanket of hypnotizing and mesmerizing drones, pulling you right back into the world itself as you become aware of everything that was around you. And so with that, we have essentially covered something you are or something you do. Now, a very strange album, even within the project of Pinkcourtesyphone, I feel. But it's interesting, as each and every release, they do seem to offer up that same mysterious pink aesthetic that dominates the project so brilliantly. But sometimes, certain ones stand out so oddly in a peculiar way, like this one. This one acting as a much colder and icier experience, like, the further depths of it all, And bit of an odd tangent, but if I had to make a visual comparison of sorts, where I described as a ravishment of mirror, acting a lot like the film Inland Empire by David Lynch, of course, this feels a lot more like the very strange series Rabbits that was featured in the very film Inland Empire as the film within a film. Rabbits is just one of the most strangest things that David Lynch has ever conjured up, I think, in his brilliant career. It's so bizarre and weird to get your head around and stuff, and I struggle with it, but it's so brilliant in its own right. Because for me, it's just that thing, no clues and no context, just this odd sense of dread, I feel. And that's what I feel like what you get on this, no context, no clues about what's going on, just this ominous dread that pulls you into a hypnotic slumber. It's weird because that is a very ominous vibe to have, but it's still without a doubt some of the most interesting music I've had the fortune to come across, and something I just love to listen to constantly, even though it does feel very spooky and weird. It just has that narcotic effect that just knocks me out completely. Brilliant stuff. And so I think with that, we'll be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music today. A weird one to have reviewed, but such is the nature of this show. We just review whatever ends up getting reviewed, if that makes sense. It was just that I felt like writing about this particular Pinkcourtesyphone release at the time. I'm hoping we can review more in the future, but we will have to see. Of course, it's very hard to write about something that has such a narcotic effect, I feel. But yeah, definitely a favourite of mine, but I think they all are, truth be told. But yeah, there's just something so interesting and quaint about this one, and as well about owning this one, on this strange sounding minimalist album on cassette. It's definitely something I'm proud to have in not just my cassette collection, but my Pinkcourtesyphone collection as well. What a brilliant little thing to own, I think. This thing is great. So yeah, with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.